Five Nights at Freddy's is a game that most people have heard about, but the majority of those people couldn't tell you anything about the games or what you do in them. Plus, the whole concept of lore is completely non-existent to them. All they can say is that it is a game about killer robots. Now, if you're a diehard fan like me and all the community is, you know people debate which Fnaf is the all-time best. Specifically out of the first 6. I don't really count the ones after this because Ultimate Custom Night, Help Wanted, and Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach don't fall into the mainline games. Security Breach is also a special case, being that the gameplay is completely different, being like the free roam and the other stuff. And don't try to say Sister Location has free roam, because that is a total lie and we all know it, even though it is hilariously attempted. So I don't consider these in the running. So, which FNAF is the best one? Well, it is definitely FNAF 4 by far. To understand this, we'll first have to go into each game in-depthly and look at the good and bad things in each game. And I mean in all aspects, like of course gameplay, but also lore, horror, and the visuals. Now, if I don't cover something that you think is a good or bad part, it is because I don't think it is. Or I'm just really stupid and don't know. But yeah, let's get straight into it with FNAF 1. I'm also going to talk about FNAF 4 last, being that is the game I think is the best, so you know where the other games stand at first. The original Five Nights at Freddy's definitely sets the bar for best FNAF game pretty high. From a visual standpoint, this game is well made. Each camera has a well-crafted design and the animatronics are made in some great aspects as well. The horror definitely comes mostly from the ambience in my opinion. The creepy ambience makes you nervous the entire time and keeps you on your toes. Most FNAF related YouTubers also use this ambience in their videos to create some creepiness as well. Something that I think this game does the best is the secret horror screens you can sometimes see. These really let you know that you are unsafe even with the doors. The first time you see these screens, you really get a chill down your spine and you probably won't see them for the rest of the game. This really makes the player have an unsettling time when they play. The gameplay is pretty simple, but that's what makes it really easy for new players to understand. Plus, each character has their own unique action they do to attack you. Bonnie and Chica both do come to one door, but they have different routes to get to you and they also come and go at different times. The lore for this game is quite good, being that it's the first, and it leaves the player with some mystery. You wonder who's behind this and why. The game is well rounded, and it is definitely a classic, but that does not mean it is perfect, and there are cons in this game and they do stick out. Visually, this game does not have too many flaws, outside the fact that the animatronics are not too scary when they're not only making their way to you, but also when they're jump scaring you. Now there are creepy parts, but it's mostly kind of normal looking. Each frame the animatronics are in is usually not too creepy. Now some are, but the majority are not, and the fact that their non-threatening design is used in their jump scare definitely underutilizes their full potential. A game that fixes this problem is FNAF Plus. The animatronics in this game, even when they're not hostile, look creepy as heck, and their jump scare is as well. If the original FNAF did this, I feel like the game would be a whole lot scarier. This is the biggest problem visually, but also from a horror standpoint. But besides that, the only other issue with the horror in my opinion is the jump scare audio. And I know that sounds kind of stupid, but I feel like it definitely takes off a layer of fear. You see, the game is a lot scarier when you play it for the first time because you don't know what you're doing. The scenario you're in isn't possible, but you can suspend your unbelief and the scares are much more frightening. The gameplay has the least plot problems though. Also guys, please know, I don't hate any of these games, but I have to go over each one and discuss the flaws. But I'm not trying to say that the game is bad, but each of the games do have flaws, but some of them more than others. One of them may have like no flaws, but again, I just have to go over this so you kind of know where everything is at. But like I said, the simplicity of this game is good for new players, but the problem comes mostly from players not knowing what to do. And I'm not saying this is all necessarily the player's fault. You see, Phone Guy is quite nonchalant about what to do in the game. All he really says is not to die, and that is it. The only nugget of info he gives you is that Foxy doesn't like being watched. You have no idea that Foxy will run at you until he does, so this is pretty sneaky. Dealing with Bonnie and Chica is quite easy, being that they come to either your left or right door. Freddy, on the other hand, is quite complex. He makes his way to your right corner, and in later nights, basically you have to watch him in that camera the whole time. If you're not, he will attack you. But the game says absolutely nothing about this, and you have to figure it out for yourself, which can be quite difficult. The last issues with this game come from the lore. The lore in this game isn't really built up, and I don't mean that it's not there. It's quite simple lore, meaning that most people figured it out. But if you were playing for the first time, you'd really have nothing to go off of until the later games. Once the lore was discovered, it was quite interesting, but it was nothing to gawk at. You see, Fnaf 1 is not the best game, but it definitely is a close second in my opinion. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is very similar to Fnaf 1, with the visual aspects of both of them taking place in a similar style pizzeria. And I don't mean layout wise, I mean design wise, but they're both individually different. Fnaf 2 introduces new mechanics, new animatronics, and a whole new environment. The gameplay in this game is definitely more complex than the first one. You have to use an old Freddy mask in order to protect yourself from the animatronics. You also have to wind a music box and use a flashlight as well. The gameplay in this game, as well as the Fnaf 1, 3, 4, and 6, has a repetitive style of the animatronics attacking you. This makes the games replayable though. You see, Fnaf 2 is visually way more designed than Fnaf 1 and 3 in my opinion. Each room and animatronic has a creative design that adds to this game a whole lot. The lore here is taking up a little differently because people begin to wonder when this game came out, which game came first out of the first two installments of Five Nights at Freddy's. And the horror is taken up a bigger notch here as well, with the new characters having a majority of them having a more ghoulish design, which just adds to the horror. And the fact that there are a lot more animatronics adds to the chaos of this game. But, you know, for each positive here, there is a negative. You see, the map is much bigger than Fnaf 1, and you'd think that the characters would really travel everywhere than just one route. Well, you'd be wrong, because unless you're playing for the first time, you're not going to be looking at each camera. The strategy in this game is quite simple, being that you check the light in the hallway, then wind the music box in the camera, and then put the Freddy mask on and repeat. You don't need to look at any camera besides the music box, which is quite a shame because the cameras have really cool designs. Something else is that the repetitive of this game is specifically a lot more bullying than the others, like a lot more like just mind-numbing. And I noted that the vast majority of characters in this game, but over half of them just use the mask mechanic to be dealt with. There are only 3 that don't, which is quite a shame. Now, something that I didn't mention is that Phone Guy does a much better job of telling you what to do, and it doesn't just leave you in the dark in this game. But I think that really does work out a lot better for you, so you're not just completely clicking random buttons and doing random stuff. Fnaf 3, I think, definitely has the most creative gameplay, being that it uses audio lures to direct the threat away from you. And the idea of a haunted house type deal is really cool other than a pizzeria. The lore at this point is also nicely developed too, and the fact that William Afton / Springtrap is the threat makes it a lot cooler. Not to mention the phantoms that are used to disrupt your office equipment. You see, this game seems like it would be the best from the way I'm describing it, but it's not, and there's only one big reason why. This jump scare, I feel like, really takes away from the horror. And that's sad because the phantom jump scares seem a lot better and more well placed. Being that Springtrap is the only real thing that can kill you and cause the game over, and how he's the murderer of the original children, you would think his jump scare would be a lot more terrifying, but it's really not. This and the fact that the ambience isn't really pleasant really takes away from the horror aspect as a total in my opinion. Now, it is still scarier than the first game, but not by much. But overall, I still think it's super well done, and I do appreciate how Fnaf 3 has turned out though. Sister Location is definitely a game I'm not too fond of, and I feel like it has the most flaws than the other ones. I really only have one main positive to talk about here, and that is the jump scares. The jump scares in this game I feel like are the most scary out of all of them. They are done super well, and they come at random times that you don't expect. Also, the animatronic models are done really awesome as well. Outside that, this game has nothing else that I think is good. I'll briefly go over it. The game is entirely scripted, except for Night 4 and Night 5, and even with them not being scripted, they're still a pain to deal with. The game has no replayability at all. Once you see it for the first time, that's it. Anytime you watch it again, there's never going to be the same spark. The lore is also twisted, being in what time it takes place in, and why it all exists. Like before, once you play it for the first time, you know when all the scares are going to come up, and that takes away from the game substantially. I could continue ranting here for a while, But if you want to know more about my opinions on Sister Location, I recommend you watch the video by Yeah on YouTube, because it kind of covers my whole thought process, and me and him basically agree on the same level. I'm going to be brief here since there is a lot to go over with FNAF 6. You see, it's interesting because it has a tycoon section, a night section, and a salvage section. The tycoon part of this game is definitely really fun and enjoyable, but I don't think it should exist in FNAF 6. Being that you can stay in this mode for as long as you want, you're basically dreading going to the night sections so you can stay in the goofy pizzeria simulator for as long as you want. Now, I don't think it's bad, and I do think it's quite fun, but I think something else should be in place here rather than the tycoon section. But again, it works out in the long run, so I don't think it's that bad. The night sections, though, have a new style before, being that you have to do tasks while fending off the animatronics. You don't have doors this time, or a Freddy mask, but you do use an audio lure like in FNAF 3. But this time you also don't have cameras, you have a motion detector. That's how you tell where everything is in the vents. Also, the amount of noise you can make can determine if your run is going to work or not. This makes for a really interesting challenge to play through. But what takes away from this game, in my opinion, is the jump scares. They are very goofy looking and not too fast moving either, so it doesn't scare you all. Now, it may scare you the first time you play it, but usually not at all. These night sections are still fun though, but the salvage part of this game is without a doubt the best part. Each time you do a salvage, you run the risk of dying or losing your value to your attraction. And I did say that the tycoon section shouldn't exist, but the salvage section does tie into it, so I think the whole game works as a total. Each time a new animatronic is being salvaged, the creepy render that it has makes it way more unsettling and scary. In my opinion, this is the best part of the game. Even with the goofy jump scares, it still builds a lot of tension, and when the jump scare happens, you're definitely a lot more scared. So this is overlookable. Also, the multiple endings allows for a lot of replayability and makes the game fun each time. But even with all this good stuff, this does not match into the last game on this list. FNAF 4 definitely earns the spot as best FNAF game by far. When looking at each game, I was compiling the flaws of each one to talk about, and wouldn't you know it, this game doesn't really have any. And you may try to say that the game is repetitive and the jump scares are the same, and yes, I know that, but FNAF 1, 2, and 3 are as well. They're still good games though, so I don't really consider this a problem. One might say that the game is like FNAF 1, being that the animatronics have similar meaning. Freddy and Foxy have different actions, while Bonnie and Chica have the same. What's different here is that Bonnie and Chica do use the same mechanic, but what's different than FNAF 1 is they both require you to use audio cues to know when they approach. This makes the game more interesting and provides for a fun challenge. You don't have cameras to know when they are close, so you look down each hallway and listen to see if they're right out at your door, and if they are not, you flash the light to check. You see, Foxy starts where Bonnie and Chica do, and you can theoretically keep him out of your office if you're fast. But Foxy is much more quicker, and he'll more than likely get into your closet when you're not looking. At this point, you just go up to the closet and check on him, and then flash him with a flashlight if you see him in the closet. Freddy, on the other hand, is behind you and always under the bed, and what he'll do is send his little Freddles to the top of your bed. After over 3 of them are on your bed for a certain amount of time, Freddy jump scares you. To prevent this, just flash your light on the Freddles. On top of this, nights 5 and 6 do something really sneaky. All the animatronics combine into Nightmare Fredbear, which is really cool and unexpected. But what's even more sneaky is then on night 7, a character known as Nightmare comes, which is basically a black version of Fredbear. It's sneaky because he looks a lot more terrifying because you can't really see any detail. This character is super cool, and the gameplay is really well done and it's fun to play. This is what makes FNAF 4 a prime game. The horror in this game is done really well and perfectly. Being that it takes place in a house rather than a pizzeria really changes the atmosphere. Now I know FNAF 3 is a haunted house, but it still looks like a pizzeria. Anytime I play it before knowing it was a haunted house, I thought it was a pizzeria too. Something else to note is that there is a mini game with plush trap, which adds a nice change of pace and makes for a really fun little mini thing. The nightmare models of the animatronics are really terrifying, and the jump scares are no exception. Now, continuing with the horror and also going into the lore adds to the horror. Allow me to explain. Most of you know that the kid you play as sees the animatronics as nightmares. You're probably thinking, what does that mean? You see, it's really just his big brother scaring him with a Fnaf mask. You see these in the little mini games. Everything in the player's eyes is much more scary. The lore also shows how William Afton's youngest son, known as Evan, the player you play as, gets his head bitten by the Fredbear animatronic. Then you see at the beginning of each night where the Freddy plush is on the bed, there is an object beside the bed that will change. This responds to the lore in some way. I'm not too sure, but this is why I think the game takes the cake for being the best FNAF game. Now, I do like all the games I covered, but they're not all on the same level. If you guys have any thoughts of what you think about today's video, please let me know down in the comment section below and I'll be sure to respond to you. I really think that I had a really fun time going through each game and looking at the good and bad stuff of each game because I am a huge fan of Five Nights at Freddy's. But yeah guys, thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Stay awesome, God bless, and peace.